Hello and welcome, everyone, and thanks for joining us today in a new episode of Let's Talk About Data Show. My name is Ibrahim Imara. I'm a database specialist solutions architect. I'm one of your regular hosts, and I'm based out of London. Today, we are going to continue the discussion that we have started a couple of weeks ago about the new innovations in space of relational databases. We talked about the Postgres, Oracle databases, and today is the day to discuss about the SQL Server databases. And for that, I am the pleasure to be joined with my colleagues, Chris, Baris, and Andre, who will be discussing this topic with us today. So let me start first by asking our guests to introduce themselves. So Baris would like to start.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for having us, Ibrahim. My name is Barış Fırtınalar, and I work as a specialist solutions architect here at AWS, based out of Luxembourg, with 20 plus years of experience across infrastructure, SQL Server, Windows Server, Active Directory, and VMware. And for the past 10 years, I've been with AWS helping customers migrate, modernize, and optimize their workloads in the cloud. Thanks again.
Thank you. And we're going alphabetically. So Chris, you're next.
Hi all, lovely to be here again. I'm Chris, 3 years at AWS, 25 years as a SQL Server professional. I've held most roles in the industry, started off as a dev, done DBA work, platform engineering, project delivery, and I've spent pretty much 15 years migrating workloads to the cloud. So yeah, my superpower is practical experience, and I love my commercial databases, especially SQL Server.
Amazing. And last but not least, Andre.
So hi everyone, I'm Andre Stalinoha. I'm based out of Germany. So my background is very similar to the background that Barish has. So I'm an infrastructure person. I have 20 years of experience doing large data center migrations and consolidations. And then I would say my specialty is really storage plus the infrastructure related to SQL workloads on AWS.
Thanks a lot. And on chat, we have Jeff, our show producer, and Tony, my colleague, and the host of the show as well. And they will be happy to answer your questions. Okay, so let's start first by talking about SQL Server workloads on AWS. There are different options that customers can implement, or the way that they can host their SQL Server databases on AWS. What are those different options, and what are the differences between them?
Sure, I'll take that one over in. So yeah, there are three core options, and they all fit different use cases. I mean, ultimately, you're choosing what's best for your requirements, but we've got SQL Server on EC2, fully self-managed, the most flexible service. I mean, it's going to support all the features, all the SQL Server features you have on-prem. If you want to move to the cloud quickly, with as little refactoring as possible, EC2's, probably your first choice. It comes in at the lowest price point, but ultimately at the cost of you having to manage everything, provisioning, backups, incidents, and the like. It has full support for bring your own license, and it's got some features that RDS does not support. Andre is an expert in FSX for ONTAP, for example, which is only available on EC2. The other end of the spectrum is RDS, fully managed. It's coming up to 16 years old. We take care of provisioning, backup, scaling, auditing, recovery, etc. I mean, ultimately, the use case around RDS is about you spending time writing code, building apps, not managing infrastructure, not spending lots of time on incidents calls and fixing backups and the like. Ultimately, though, as a managed service, you pay a premium above and beyond EC2 for that. But the use case is, all about, time optimization ultimately. And then we've got RDS Custom, which pretty much sits in between EC2 and RDS. I mean, it's a hybrid. It's still a managed service, but it's a couple of points of difference. It gives you full access to the operating system, which is not available on RDS.
Mhm.
It gives SQL Server sysadmin, which is not available on RDS.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, it supports features first and foremost that RDS does not. So the sort of things that would fit into that category are features that access the file system, so file tables and the like, file stream. You can also bring your own licenses for pre-production and production on RDS Custom, but it's not as feature-rich in terms of the platform features as RDS. So, for example, one limitation of RDS Custom is we currently don't support read replicas. And also, in terms of initial configuration and patching, its overheads are higher. So it sits between the two. Ultimately, you still pay a premium for a managed service, but it will give you some features and some licensing support options that are not fully available on RDS. I mean, what's the best for you? It really does depend on your requirements. I mean, if you want to lift and shift rapidly, EC2 is the option that will give you the least refactoring. Every feature is supported, and you can do it quickly, rapidly, and easily. If you want to move away from infrastructure management and all the costs of setting up and managing SQL Server, fully managed RDS is what we recommend. And if you've got something in between where perhaps you've got an application with a custom feature that RDS doesn't support, ultimately you're probably looking at RDS Custom. Some people say to me, well, what's the best? I mean, my view on this, I mean, ultimately, if you've got lots of SQL servers, it's probably a mix. Different apps will have different requirements. Therefore, it's about thinking about what you want to do, what features you support, what licensing you have, and then choosing between the three. And often a mix of all three is a good going in point.
Yeah, I totally agree. It's similar to what we are doing with Oracle Database as well, because it all depends on the having different workloads, and each workload will be more fit within different offering. But Barish, I know that for the SQL Server on the EC2, maybe it's not like the Oracle for EC2, for example. Oracle EC2, the licenses, everything that you are responsible for. But for SQL Server and EC2, it's a bit different, I believe, especially when it comes to the licenses.
Yeah, exactly. Because with SQL Server on EC2, now you have the option to either bring your own licenses to AWS, or you can leverage license included, which is SQL Server is pre-installed and license cost is included in the hourly rate. Right, and no CALs are required. It's available for Standard Edition and Enterprise Edition. But if you already have SQL Server licenses, given that you have active software assurance with your licenses, you can also bring them over to EC2, which gives you this flexibility with EC2 over fully managed RDS option.
Yeah, and Andre, this is part of the images, the AMI images that we are distributing for the SQL Server.
That's correct. So we work closely with Microsoft. So as you know, that SQL 2025 has been released last year in November. I think it was 18th of November, and we had our AWS machine image or AMIs 2 days after the official go live date. So we are pretty much fast. Well, we try to be fast with rolling it out and to our customers. So like Barry said, you can go with license included, so you get it all nice bundled, or you can bring over your existing licenses if you made some investments to the licenses and you own them together with the software assurance. So it gives you the flexibility. And as part of the discussions with customers, we usually end up with these three main areas. So it's either the SQL on EC2 or the area that Chris is mainly covering, which is the RDS. And then the discussion is, can we go with RDS SQL, the fully managed offering, or do we have to go, or does the customer want to go with RDS Custom, mainly because they can bring over their existing licenses, which is currently not available at RDS SQL.
Perfect. Let me quickly go through the comments that we got from our viewers. From Hiri that's one of the regular viewers. Hi everyone, excited to watch. Thank you. And also we have DBA guy 123 and in Farhan Khan. Hello all. And afternoon would be good to see what's going on in the SQL Server space in AWS. That's exactly what we're going to cover today. And there is this comment, EC2 can be scary when you take over projects and you have auto-scaling groups buried in there and try to spin up 1 million servers, and AWS put our accounts on lockdown. Yeah.
I don't think you spin up 1 million of SQL servers. So I think it's mainly probably for the front-end servers that you have as a part of your auto-scaling groups. But yeah.
Yeah, that's ridiculous. Again, to the same what Chris was saying, having fully managed servers like RDS, it takes away all of these operational burden of your shoulder. Because and because as you can see, the cost at that time was $500 US. Yeah, just because usually the instances. This is I've seen it before. The instances that run the SQL servers, they are not cheap. So, and we'll be talking about the right sizing as well and how to optimize the cost of these instances. Perfect.
I think with the beauty of RDS can be as well as this fast prototyping. So really for developers, when you need to spin up something for a short period of time, a couple of days, couple of weeks. So this probably is a good fit for RDS SQL. If you would have a EC2 with your own licenses, maybe not so much because you have to have those licenses. So RDS can give you a freedom of choice, and then with on-demand pricing, you just simply pay as you go.
Great. And back to the 2025 announcement or the new announcement in general. So, Barish, there are 2 developer editions right now for the SQL Server 2025.
Yeah, exactly. Historically, the free developer edition, right, was always functionally identical to enterprise edition.
Okay.
And I think the risk here is, as a developer, if you write a code using this developer edition, probably you are using enterprise-only features. So with 2025, now you can match your development environment to your production license. You can use standard developer edition. So if your target production runs on standard edition of SQL Server. So this is also a free version. And this one enforces exactly the same limits as the paid version of SQL Server in terms of features and restrictions on like the CPU, memory caps, and feature restrictions. So if you try to use an enterprise edition feature, it will fail during development, not during development, not during deployment, right? So it prevents the accidental, I think, use of expensive enterprise features.
Yeah.
And it would force a company to rewrite the code or pay for enterprise edition license upgrade, right? So that's, I think, an important launch in terms of SQL Server related development and life cycles.
There's probably one cool thing about the SQL. Well, it's not developer, but it's related to developer. It's more related to the SQL Server Standard Edition, but because now developer has 2 versions, so it's relevant to developer as well. That Microsoft has increased the limits for SQL Standard Edition. So previously it was 24 cores and 128 gigs of RAM. Now they went up to 32 cores and 256 gigs of RAM. I already had some customers, they said, well, look, this is perfect. Now we can have a better sweet spot and we can find better or beefier instance type to support our SQL standard workloads. So yeah, I think this is really a good one.
And based on the license, will also or the edition will also be, there is a limitation on the number of databases or something like that, or it's not related?
No, it's not related. It's just how much you're convenient to run, and at some point If you over provision on your databases, then your performance might suffer. Yeah. So what could help is, as one of the things that Microsoft releases, the resource governor. So that's where you can actually carve out the CPU and memory performance, and you can assign individual databases, let's say, performance quotas. In the past, it was only for SQL Enterprise Edition. Now with SQL 2025, it's in the SQL Standard Edition as well. So that, again, it gives you more flexibility to pack more databases. And if you have some Bali victim workloads, you can protect by using the resource governor on SQL Standard Edition.
Yeah. Like in each iteration of new SQL Server versions, I think they are slowly closing the feature gap between Enterprise Edition and Standard Edition. And these are some of those new additions to the Standard Edition. Anyway, Chris.
To Andre's point, though, the Standard Edition uplift in terms of compute, it's a big cost optimizer as well, because customers have been, had in the past have to anything above 128 gig of RAM, which is, for a data storage, it tends to be memory that's the bottleneck. You have to go to enterprise at nearly, it's order of magnitude more expensive. So a lot of customers, across SQL Server here, there, on-premise, other cloud providers will be able to take advantage of that feature. It's a really big one.
Yep.
Good feature.
Perfect. And also we have Tony shared the blog about the developer edition for RDS SQL. So you can check it to get more details about that. And back again to the new features or the announcements of the 2025. There's what's called now contained distributed availability groups, right? So let me ask first, what's meant by distributed availability group?
So
someone coming from an Oracle background, so this is not a familiar term for me.
Yeah, I can take this one, might be a bit broader, but typically if customers are deploying their SQL workloads on EC2 and they would like to go with HA configuration, so have a high availability scenario where they can have a, let's say, synchronous replication. So the recovery time objective would be close to 0, and then the recovery point objective would be 0 because it's synchronous replication.
Yeah.
So there are two prevailing technologies that I see with customers. The one is a failover cluster instance where you have a shared storage, and then you let the storage handle the synchronous replication. The second one, it's always on availability groups where you actually let the SQL engine handle the replication. And then the contained availability groups, that's something that Microsoft introduced with SQL 2022. And with SQL 2025, it has been extended to distributed availability groups. And then the concept of distributed availability groups is that you have it for either migration, or I've seen customers doing it for disaster recovery purposes. So as I mentioned, with the with the availability groups, you have a synchronous replication. The distributed means that you go across the region and you have an async replication because you don't suffer with this like commit on both sides. So this is in terms of Microsoft distributed. You have two different clusters. You can have independent domains, and then you distribute across the regions and use it for disaster recovery. And going back to what this contained means, again, it comes down how the failover mechanism works, and then what are the differences between the failover cluster instance, because this is where you failover the whole SQL instance. With availability groups, you failover on database level. So if you're so that what it means that normally there might be some user objects, logins, permissions, jobs associated with your database, but these are not replicated by default because they are stored in the system databases and they are not in the custom databases.
I see.
So that's why Microsoft implement this contained, so that you pack it together and you make it part of the replication, so you don't have to recreate them on the secondary, or if now with SQL 2025, you have it in another region. So you pack it together, which saves you some time, and you make sure that your application works because these data or these configuration items are replicated along. So that's the idea of contained. So you pack it together, and with distributed availability groups, you have asynchronous replication, which can go to another region where you can have your disaster recovery scenario, or I had some customers, they used it for migrating data from on-prem to AWS as well, or between two different environments.
Perfect. And Crash, for RDS, I believe we are using always on for the high availability, right?
Yeah, there's a bit of a difference between RDS and RDS custom.
Yeah.
For RDS, we're using availability groups. And for RDS custom, we're using disk level replication. What that actually means is a couple of things, points of difference actually. So on RDS has a limit of 100 databases, which is associated with the thread count cost for managing always on availability groups. There's a finite number you can handle. Whereas RDS custom, one of its use cases is consolidation. You can support up to 5,000 databases because it's not got that overhead. So, point of difference between the two there.
Let's see. And also there are some other performance-related features that we have introduced around reInvent related to RDS, SQL Server on RDS as well, right?
Yeah. We've got 7th generation instances are just out. In the past, the typical price performance uplift you'd get from a generation lift was give or take. It's workload dependent, right? Mm-hmm. About 15%.
Yeah.
7th generation offers, up to 40, 50.
Oh, wow.
So, there's performance, you can run more threads, you can host more databases, you can run more transactions, right? Chip enhancements, memory enhancements, making that possible. And we're also switching off hyper-threading on 7th generation above a certain size. So that will, that gives you a boost as well on top of, the hardware advantages. So next generation instances, order of magnitude quicker than the generations before. Another one, multi-disk support. So RDS, one core limitation of RDS in the past was we'd run everything on a single disk, managed D drive, right? And although, you could run a lot on IO2 block express provisioned IOPS, it was expensive. And the traditional model, the on-premise model, logs split from data, split from backups and tempdb, you couldn't do that. And you don't necessarily have to do that. If you can meet your performance requirements with a single disk, then that would work. However, if you've got some top-end workloads, massive multi-terabyte SQL servers, they genuinely may demand a multi-disk setup. And therefore the single disk design would be a blocker. So what we come out now is you can add 3 additional disks, and you can use a mix of general purpose and provisioned IOPS. So you can increase your storage capacity by 4-fold, your IOPS by 4-fold, should you so wish, with 4 sets of disks. Ultimately you can also cost optimize with it. So if you think about it, if you've got hot and cold databases and if your collective requirements in the past meant you had to go with provisioned IOPS, very expensive, right? Relatively to GP3. You could place, your cold data databases on GP3 and perhaps archive to a technique to apply with this feature release is archive to GP3 databases on separate disks, and then you leave your hot data on IO2 block express should you need to. Ultimately, if you get all the performance you need at the right price point, it's still better to have a single disk because you don't have to manage the overheads of multiple disks. But if you need to go above and beyond what the capabilities were before, and perhaps make some cost savings, multi-disk support is a good one. And I think Andre touched on the third item around performance optimization. We finally released Resource Governor for RDS, which wasn't available in the past. And ultimately, Resource Governor is a good tool if you've got lots of databases, you want to solve noisy neighbor problem, or just dynamically if you want to cap rogue queries. So that's out as an option, whether it's on an ad hoc basis or a permanent basis. I mean, certainly if you're a customer with lots of databases and you want to dedicate resource between databases, prevent one database affecting another, Resource Governor is a good one to apply proactively. So yeah, I think those are the three main performance RDS features that are out.
Perfect. And also, Tony has shared the blogs around the additional storage volumes and the resource governor, I believe. Yeah, resource governor, because in Oracle also we have the resource manager, which will give you control over the allocation of resources for different sessions. And I would assume it would be the same. It's like, it's a dynamic thing. You can, for some databases, maybe in the morning you assign to them higher resources, but in the evening they are not that active. Mainly the data house databases are more active in the evening, something like that, or batch processing is running, then you allocate more resources to those databases and vice versa.
Okay. Yeah, you have a classifier function, and that
okay.
you can use it to split by application, by login, etc. Okay. But ultimately, you are carving up disk, memory, and CPU amongst a set of databases. Yeah, I mean, one use case actually that I've seen it applied a few times. It's quite a rare use case, but ultimately, around the use of read replicas, you could potentially use a resource governor to remove read replicas. And how that might work is, if you can cap reporting performance within business acceptable boundaries, you can potentially avoid having to spin up a fully licensed read replica. It's all about, the business, acceptance ultimately, but read replicas, it's a fully licensed node, and maybe you can collapse that and save some money as well.
Got it. Because we are talking about money, and usually this is one of the main topics when we are discussing the relational databases with our enterprise customers, especially, of course, with the commercial databases. The cost of the licenses and how to optimize the database instances and how to optimize the spending for the RDS, for the commercial databases. So when we are talking about the cost savings and cost optimizations, what are the main thing based on your daily discussion with the customers and what you are seeing? What are the main opportunities that the customers are overlooking and not paying much attention for when it comes to the cost optimization? And let me ask you, Paris, for that.
Yeah, thank you, Ibrahim. So most customers, I think they focus on storage and compute separately, but the real magic, I think, happens when we approach this cost optimization from 3 dimensions simultaneously, both compute, storage, and licensing. And I think the biggest opportunity here is CPU optimization, especially for license-included instances. But this cost optimization also applies for bring your own license use cases, because if you optimize your compute, you also would bring less licenses to AWS, which you would use for other projects, or you can maybe cancel software assurance for those remaining licenses. So you are paying for SQL Server licenses based on your vCPU count. For example, a pure OLTP workload often involves small transactions, serial queries like inserts, updates, deletes, or lookups, where the speed of a single core determines the performance of the transaction. Yeah. So high clock speed is more important than the core count. So also, if you are running a a memory-intensive workload that doesn't need all those cores, you are essentially paying for SQL Server licenses that you don't use. So we are constantly innovating and launching new EC2 instance families, which benefits both EC2 and RDS, because RDS is using EC2 as its building block. So with faster and faster CPUs, we unlock significant cost-saving potentials for customers, especially use cases use cases that are eligible for CPU optimization.
That's great. And you mentioned one of the things that the customers should do is the right sizing in order to optimize their cost when it comes to the relational database or the SQL Server databases. So how the customer should approach something like that, the right sizing? Because usually it's one of those tricky tasks. Okay, I've been running this workload on premise for years, and because you already have purchased the hardware and I'm using it to the max. Whether this is what I really need or not, I already purchased it. But the concept is different when you are moving to the cloud.
Yeah.
So how do you approach a case like that, the right sizing?
Yeah. First of all, so it depends on where the customer is, whether they are already on AWS or they are on premises and planning their migration. So for customers already on AWS, they can start with AWS Compute Optimizer. We can discuss it later. But you mentioned customers that are already on premises. So this is where your AWS account team becomes invaluable, because they can help you with assessment and right sizing by engaging specialists like us, like Andre, Chris, myself, migration specialists and solutions architects, who do this every day, right? So we have the proven methodologies and tools, especially designed for on-premises and assessments in other providers. One of the most powerful programs that we offer is AWS Optimization and Licensing Assessment, or shortly we call it OLA. So this OLA, so this is complementary, so fully funded by AWS, that analyzes your actual on-premises resource utilization using our tooling that we provide. So we will assess your workload for third-party licensing, and in this case, it's SQL Server licenses and Windows licenses and application dependencies. And this OLA program uses discovery tools to collect this data for maybe 2 weeks, 3 weeks, a month, with actual usage data from your environment. Not what you provisioned, but actual usage data, actual utilization, but what actually you're using, right? And this is critical because our data shows that more than 80% of on-premises workloads are over-provisioned.
Yeah.
So this OLA program helps us with comprehensive reports that models your deployment options based on your actual resource utilization, your existing licensing entitlements, and it identifies the right sizing opportunities about right sizing your licensing optimization strategies, and it will provide a data-driven total cost of ownership reports that you can use this to build your business case to move to AWS. For SQL Server specifically, we also identify an average of 45% savings in licensing costs and significant compute savings from right-sizing potential that we see from many customer migrations.
So
yeah, I mean, I think you've once you're in AWS as well, you've got to apply the same approaches. You've got to know
exactly.
what are your hottest, most expensive instances, and how's the CPU being used? Can you change the sizes? Can you scale up and down for peak periods and the like? So it's keeping an eye on utilization once you're in the cloud with the tools we give you and help we give you as well. Super important.
I like what Baris said, that it's not only about compute, but it's also about storage.
Yeah.
And I know storage is my thing, but I had a customer use case, and they've been complaining about high cost for AWS SQL, and then they approached me and, hey, can you help us to optimize? I said, okay, we can have a look. And then we had a look at the storage, and I just realized that they had over-provisioned storage for RDS, and by really optimizing the underlying storage, I was able to cut their costs by 30%. So there are some, let's say, easy wins that you can achieve by looking at your infrastructure while running your SQL workloads, and then you can really cost optimize. And the storage is just one piece of it. We do have some other things which we just recently released. I've mentioned the HA configuration, so customers are looking to have a highly available solutions on AWS. I've mentioned that we have 2 licensing models. You can bring over your licenses, or you can go with license included. One of the latest announcements that we made, that we previously had a private offering, we call it passive node benefit. Now it's GA. So we can help customers to save up to 40% of the HA SQL two-noded HA cluster deployments on AWS by leveraging this. And the way out is, if you know how the passive node benefit works, we can offset the cost of the passive node benefit for SQL, even with SQL license included, where you buy the SQL license from us. So definitely there are some nice things.
I was going to ask about how the cost optimization works for the high availability deployment, because usually this is one of the issues that the customers are facing, because they will have to license another instance with the same resources usually for the high availability.
It used to be like this. I mean, again, if you are bringing over your own SQL licenses and you have a software assurance, Microsoft will provide you, or there is a thing which is called passive node benefit. So if you have an active passive node cluster, you don't have to license the passive node benefit, the passive node. And like I said, it was not the case for license included. So you had to license both SQL nodes, active and passive. But since we announced this kind of a new feature, you can offset and you can save up to 40%, because you don't have to pay for the SQL licenses for the passive cluster node. It works for only 2-noded cluster, but this is the most prevalent configuration I see being deployed with customers. So 2 AZs, 2 cluster nodes, active, passive.
Yeah.
Is that also available for RDS or just for EC2?
It's only for EC2. I'm not aware that it is for RDS.
Okay. Is it always cluster, or what type of cluster?
It's both. So you can go for
covers both.
It's both.
Okay.
It's both.
Yeah,
so
both
I mentioned
always on
failover cluster
groups.
instance. Correct.
Yeah. And always on identity groups. Exactly.
Okay. Got it. But also from RDS perspective, Chris, I know that we have announced the saving plans that we touched on in one of our sessions, and I believe it also applies to the RDS SQL Server as well.
Yeah, savings plans. Yeah, it applies to the vast majority of our database services. So, yeah, I mean, up until this point, we released this feature. We had reserved instances as a way to save on compute costs. The problem with reserved instances for many customers is inflexibility. I mean, ultimately, you have to buy a particular T-shirt size, you know, when you choose a server in AWS. So you might have a server with 2 CPUs and 8 gig of RAM, and then the size up will have 4 CPUs and 16 gig of RAM. Yeah. Reserved instances highly restrictive due to licensing conditions, Microsoft licensing conditions. So you couldn't change the size, you couldn't change the type, you know, from perhaps a compute optimized to a storage optimized or a general purpose. You couldn't change the region, and you certainly couldn't change the service from, for example, SQL to Postgres or the like. So we came up with savings plans. I mean, ultimately, you buy a 1-year plan. For SQL, you get 20% saving on compute. You can change the size, the family, the region, and you can change the service. So if you're where they come into play is total flexibility. You're perhaps you know, you're looking to modernize from SQL to Postgres. savings plans are automatically applied. You're dynamically scaling up and down. You're adding new instances, you're removing them. We apply the savings plans to work out how how you could use them, the potential to use them. We've got a couple of tools from the console. I mean, ultimately, you've got savings plans purchase optimizer, which gives a detailed breakdown. It's directly available from the console. And AWS recommendations, I believe, covers some base recommendations. If we can find some servers that are not covered and potentially could be covered. But yeah, it's a highly flexible solution. I mean, a 3-year reserved instance will still give you bigger savings for that fixed period of time. However, it's not as flexible. So it's the flexibility is the advantage. And ultimately, I believe most of the database services, the saving is 20%. I think for Aurora serverless, so if you're looking at Postgres modernization, it's up to it's 35%. So it's a nice feature.
Yeah.
So again, it's based on the use case. As a customer, if you know that your workload will be stable for the upcoming 3 years, you are almost 100% sure that you are not moving away from that instance size, then you can benefit from the discounts of the reserved instances, which is usually not the case, because usually you are moving to the cloud because of the flexibility.
Yeah.
And so I think it makes more sense in the saving plans. But any other cost optimization features that we have announced recently related to the hardware?
Definitely, Ibrahim. And I think we should really mention this because the impact is big, which is the optimized CPU feature, which has actually been around for several years for bring your own license deployments on EC2. But recently, we extended this capability to license-included SQL Server, EC2 SQL Server instances. And this is, I think, a game changer because it now reduces the cost for both SQL Server and Windows Server licenses simultaneously on license-included instances. Let me give you an example. Maybe you have a SQL Server workload that needs 256 gigabytes of memory, but only needs 8 CPU cores effectively, right? So if you deploy that on X8i for X large, which is a pretty new instance that we launched last week, right? And 4X large would give you 256 gigabytes of memory, but you will end up with 16 cores. So you don't need, right? You only need the memory. But with optimized CPU on license included instances, you can customize that instance to only have 8 vCPUs while keeping full 256 gigabytes of memory. Now, where it gets really powerful is since both SQL Server and Windows Server is licensed per core, you are cutting your licensing cost effectively into half for both products. So it's potentially 40 to 50% savings on your instance cost. And I think another benefit is now this new feature separates out your license included costs in your billing. So you can clearly see the savings, right? Because the EC2 cost and the licensing cost is separated with this new feature. So with EC2 optimized CPU, it works like this. If our audience is not familiar with the concept, you can disable hyper-threading, or you can mask CPU cores on EC2 instances. And AWS would automatically adjust both your Windows Server and SQL Server licensing charges accordingly. And this again works for both SQL Server Standard Edition and Enterprise Edition. And I think it's very powerful, especially for OLTP workloads and memory-intensive use cases where you don't need all those CPU cores.
Yes, it's also just out on RDS as well. So across all three, we've got that capability now.
Yeah, I understand that because usually we will face the same issue with the Oracle customers when they want a bigger instance with massive amount of memory, but at the same time they don't need all that number of CPUs and each CPU would be licensed as well. Especially with with workloads that have it's low level of parallelism, and at the same time
Yeah.
they're processing a huge amount of data. So that's why they would require large buffer caches, but with low
Yeah.
number of CPUs. Okay, and that would take us, because you were mentioning about the X8 instances, so
Yeah.
that would take us to the demo.
Yeah.
On Andre, I know that you are going
Yeah,
to talk about the different instances that we have released and some benchmarks as well.
yeah. So I
Yeah.
mean, I'm passionate about the infrastructure. So I mean, this is what you can see on the screen. So typically, what I see with customers is that for the SQL workloads, they look for this high memory, low CPU count because of the
Hmm.
licensing implications. And then traditionally, we had customers looking really and ending up with only one instance family, and that was the X2 IEDN instance types, right? What we've done recently,
Yeah.
last year, we released the new AMD-based ones. So this is the new X8 AEDZ.
DZ.
Yeah, so these are running 5th generation of AMD CPUs. Barish was talking about single-threaded performance, so they can
Yeah.
boost up to 5 gigahertz
5
for
gigahertz.
single-threaded performance. So
Hmm.
really excellent, and they offer this 1 to 32 CPU to memory ratio. And then Barish also mentioned the new one which has been released, or we announced it, I believe, last week, which is the
Last.
new, yeah, is the new Intel X8i, which is running 6th generation of Intel Xeon. This one has 1 to 16 CPU to memory ratio. But again, if you apply what Barish said about this optimizing CPU, where you can disable hyperthreading, you can
Hmm.
get the same instance with 1 to 32 gigs CPU to memory ratio. So what I've done, and let me jump to the
So,
console here.
so one more thing, Andre, before you move, I know
Mhm.
that for the instances with the D note, it
Mhm.
means that they have internal storage as well.
They do have
Yeah.
internal storage. Yeah, I just brought it up because again, it's also coming up as a part of the customer discussions. Is if you want to get the a really excellent performance and your SQL workload is intensive on the 10 DB operations,
Yeah.
you can leverage the local instance store, which is ephemeral storage, but it's pretty much dedicated for the 10 DB
Hmm.
because it gets recreated every time you restart the SQL services. So the new AMD-based instance, it has local instance store. The new Intel one, it does not have. So it's really a question about do you really need it? Are you going
Hmm.
to benefit from it? So I thought it would be nice to compare it. For
Yeah.
my
Yeah.
benchmarking, which I'm going to describe, I did not take this in the consideration. However, what I've done is, and again, it goes what Chris said. Probably some of you've seen the announcement from our side that we've increased the performance limits for the general purpose free, for GP free storage.
Hmm.
So previously, the maximum you could get was 16,000 IOPS, and I think it was one gigabyte of throughput. Now
Hmm.
you can have a single volume which can deliver 80,000 IOPS and then 2 gigabytes of a throughput. So it's really, I would say, not a direct competition to the provisioned IOPS, so IO2 blocks express, but it can help you to cost optimize for have a good performance for, let's say, a fragment of cost what the IO2 could be, right? So
Yeah.
this is what I use for my benchmarking. I've configured the maximum limits. So jumping over to the demo, it's a synthetic benchmarking which I've done. Some of you might know the HammerDB, so it's sort of a
Yeah.
de facto industry standard. It's still a synthetic benchmark, but I think it's for the purpose of benchmark is good enough. So here you see that I have these 4 instances. So I have the old one, X2 IEDN. I have the new AMD-based one. And then I have the 2 flavors of the Intel-based one, X8i, the one with 8 cores, and then the other one with 4 cores with hyperthreading disabled. All 4 test instances, they have the same amount of memory, so 128. So if I go back to
I'm,
HammerDB and
I'm
then I can, Mhm.
just, I'm sorry, Andre, if you go back again to the pricing
Yeah, sorry.
uh, between the last two are basically exactly the same. instance, but you're using the CPU optimization feature to
Correct.
mask.
So I've disabled the hyperthreading on this one, so it just gives you a direct comparison.
And the pricing, is that for the license included one?
So that's the pricing. It's a license included for Windows.
The Windows, okay.
And I
So
assume that we're gonna bring over the SQL licenses. So the pricing here is
so
Windows
even that
license included.
there's a saving as well for the
Yeah, correct.
for the
And
Windows.
I've used two pricing models. One is one on demand, and the other one is compute savings plans. Again,
Mm.
it goes what Chris said. It gives you better flexibility, and you're not locked down with particular instance
Perfect.
family. So you can change it freely between the instance families with compute savings plans, right?
Perfect.
So yeah, let me kick off the benchmarking here. So I have the HammerDB configuration. It's identical across all 4 instance types. So this is the old one. This is the AMD based. This is the new Intel with 8 threads, and then this would be the new Intel one with 4 threads. So this is the 8 threads, and this the last one is with 8. So it's gonna pick up
Is that
here.
number for real?
This is the transactions per minute. So this is how
Oh, per
much.
minute, not per
Yeah,
second. Okay, sorry.
no. It's the transactions per minute. So this is what
Yeah.
the HammerDB will output you. There's a short ramp up period. I have 1 minute, but if you could see that this is the old one. So this is the X2 IEDN, which is using generation 3 Intel CPUs. So I would say transactions per minute is roughly around 180 to 100 transactions per 1,000 transactions per minute. The new AMD one, you can see it's more than double, so it's about
Yeah.
430,000 transactions per minute. If we go here, and then this is the new Intel with 8 threads, so it's around 290-ish thousand transactions per minute. And then this one, which is the new Intel one, but with only 4 threads, so hyperthreading
It's not
disabled.
that far.
It's not that far, so it gives you roughly 260-ish thousand transactions per minute.
Yeah.
And if I go back to the table, I can leave it running here, so I have it for 5 minutes. But what I've done, I took the performance measurements. I did an average over 10 measurements, so just to have some good representative results. And I took the X2 IEDN as a baseline, so 100%. So with the new AMD one, you get more than 2 times of a performance. So
Wow.
238% increase. The new Intel one with all 8 threads, so with hyperthreading, you're getting roughly a 50% boost. And then the other one with hyperthreading disabled, you're getting roughly 36% increase. But again, you can save on the licenses because you have to license only 4 cores and you're not licensing all 8. And then if you break it down, and then for this one, I use the on-demand pricing or savings plans. If you really calculate how much you pay per 1,000 transactions per minute, so with the old instance, you could see that it's roughly $4 a month. With the AMD, you are at $2.20. And then here you are at $3.21, and here it's like $3. So what I'm trying to say and show here is it really depends. There are some instances which you can consider to migrate your SQL workloads to. And especially if you want to have more dense, more databases on your existing configuration, and you don't want to increase the core count because of the SQL license implications, there are some interesting instances to look at. And again, your question was, how about the local instance store?
Yeah.
This is opinionated. If you as a customer, and I had a customer, they said, we want to have an instance like this, and then they insisted on it. So then I would say one of the instances to consider for upgrade, a good candidate would be the new AMD-based one. If the customer is not insisting of having the 10DB on local instance store, and they would say, oh, well, maybe we don't have to use it, or they are not using it, then I would say the X8i, so the new Intel one, could be an interesting choice for them. So I was just curious how it turns out from the infrastructure perspective.
Yeah.
So again, your question was, can we optimize and can customers optimize, and how about keeping the existing workloads cost optimized? It's really to looking at the metrics, compute optimizer, but it's also about looking at the new instance types, what performance benefits I can get from the latest and greatest that we offer to our customers.
I think there is one takeaway from this discussion, and I think it's that cost optimization isn't one-time project. It's a continuous discipline, I would say, right? Because we continuously launch new instances, innovate on infrastructure. So as Andre mentioned, maybe 3 years ago, you leveraged X2 IEDN instances and you already optimized, but we keep innovating. And now, as you see from this benchmark, you can get even more, right? You can further optimize. So you should turn this cost optimization into a continuous framework and review and reassess it continuously.
I totally agree.
100%.
And then, of course, you see the last line that I have in the description that I've used the, let's say, our AWS AMI. So the ones that we provide. So with SQL and then with Windows 2025 with no further optimizations on SQL. But then, of course, there are some knobs that you can tweak on the SQL that might give you some additional performance. But in order to compare comparable results, all 4 instances are pretty much as you would deploy them using our own AWS image.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Andre. We have 3 minutes left. I know that Paris, you mentioned there was one of the announcements or one of the features, one cool feature that many customers, AWS customers mainly, would be interested in. If you can give us an idea about it quickly.
Yeah, exactly. I think one of the coolest new launches about 2020 SQL Server 2025 is the one that absolutely can transform how customers think about database architectures. And it is this new stored procedure, which they call SP invoke external REST endpoint, which gives SQL Server to ability to call external REST APIs directly from T-SQL, directly from your statements. This might sound like a simple feature, but I think it's revolutionary because it fundamentally changes how SQL Server can interact with cloud services.
Exactly.
So for the first time, your database can natively reach out to broader AWS services without a middleware or tool installation or any application level integration. Here is what makes this so powerful. On AWS, you can now invoke, for example, Amazon Bedrock, AWS fully managed generative AI service, directly from your SQL Server stored procedures. Imagine running a query that not only retrieves, let's say, customer feedback from your database, but also calls Amazon Bedrock's models to perform real-time sentiment analysis or enrich that data so that you can build architectures that you weren't able to do before. But it goes far beyond AI. Now you can also call Amazon API Gateway to trigger workflows, invoke AWS Lambda functions for serverless processing. You can send messages to SQS, goodbye to service broker, or store files in our Amazon S3, or trigger events using Amazon.
Exactly.
Events,
I think with all the capabilities it unlocks, I think we need to dedicate a session for that, maybe with some cool demos about the different capabilities.
Definitely. Because now I'm currently working on a blog post. As soon as I finish that, maybe we can have another session where I can walk you through.
Yeah, it would be a pleasure. So Paris, Chris, Andre, thank you so much for your time today, and thanks for our viewers. It was really interesting discussion about the new features and in the space of the SQL Server. And for our viewers, thank you so much for being with us today, and be waiting for you next week, same time. We have another session and another show about AI-powered product category revolution. So wait for us, 5 p.m. CET, 8 a.m. PT, and 11 a.m. ET. Thank you so much, and see you next week. Thank you.
Like and subscribe. Cheers.
Bye.